Warning, this video contains medical graphic content. Viewer discretion is advised.
When we all go on summer holidays, few of us ask ourselves, what exactly is living in the soil that I'm stepping on? What creatures are swimming in the oceans that I so dearly love? And rarer still, what parasites are lurking in the insects flying above my head? As we will learn within the next 10 minutes, one woman did just this. When she traveled to her favorite holiday spot in Brazil, she wasn't quite thinking about the horrors that lie in the insects just inches above her head. Bernice is a 29-year-old graphic artist from Denver, Colorado. Our story now takes us to the tropical rainforest heartland of Brazil, or in this case, Campo Grande, one of the largest cities in interior Brazil, right above Paraguay. Therefore, one early December morning, Bernice and her friends decided that as a Christmas gift to themselves, they would all go down to Campo Grande in interior Brazil. Now, while Campo Grande is a big metropolitan city, it is by rainforest, as opposed to the coastal cities of Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, and Recife. Her and her friends all wanted to get a taste of the rainforest, and maybe even some of Brazil's world-renowned sugarcane and cattle industry. A week later, they all boarded the 17-hour and 15-minute flight from Denver, Colorado to Campo Grande, Brazil. On the first day there, while they were driving from the airport to their hotel, they passed by a cattle ranch that was advertising fresh sugarcane that was also being grown on the ranch. They pulled over the car, got out, and walked down to the cattle ranch where the sugarcane was being sold. All around them on this ranch there were chickens and, of course, cattle. However, none of them stopped to reflect that they did not bring bug spray with them. This becomes an essential component of our story later on. After getting their sugarcane, going to their hotel, having dinner, and going to sleep that night, it marked a great ending to a very long 17-hour flight. The next morning, when Bernice woke up to go to the bathroom mirror to wash off her face, she noticed a peculiar lesion on her arm. The lesion was bright red in color, and it was painful. However, despite this, she thought it was from the tiring previous day. She put on makeup over the lesion of her arm, and she got ready for the activities they had planned for later in the day. Later that night, when her and her friends all go back home to the hotel room, Bernice goes into the restroom and noticed that small lesion on her arm had completely gone away, as if it had never been there in the first place. She becomes ecstatic at this and thinks that it was just from the stress of the previous day. However, some part of her deep inside is wondering if that there's more to this story. Later that evening, as a result of intense throat pain that had been gradually accumulating in strength throughout the day, she goes to the bathroom mirror to check the back of her throat to look for redness, signs of what could be a strep infection. However, when she goes to the restroom mirror, she does notice small lesion-like structures on the back of the mucosa in her throat. Additionally, she also notices lesions in the corner of her mouth. At this point, she has become concerned that the lesion on her arm, while it disappeared, whatever was causing it may have moved up to the oral mucosa region. At this point, she begins to worry that an infectious agent may be to blame for her symptoms. However, not wanting to ruin the trip for the rest of her friends, she blows this off as just a freak occurrence, covers up the lesions with makeup, and then goes to dinner with her friends. Throughout the rest of Bernice's time in Campo Grande, Brazil with her friends, she experiences mild lesions in the back of her throat, throat pain, and the occasional extreme congestion and bleeding. The bleeding of the nose seemed odd to her, considering she has never had major nosebleeds before. However, her entire time in Brazil was filled with sparse and sporadic incidences of major nosebleeds. Bernice and her friends conclude their 2-week-long visit to Campo Grande, Brazil, with a quick jump over the border into Paraguay. The following day, they board their 17-hour flight back to Denver, and once they arrive at DIA, they part ways later that week to meet up for coffee to discuss their trip. A year continues, with very few symptoms experienced by Bernice, the most severe of which being extreme sore throats, congestion, and major nosebleeds, which would happen periodically about 1 to 3 times every 2 to 3 weeks. One day in late January, Bernice started noticing major throat pain, constant as opposed to sporadic. Additionally, she started realizing that her throat was actually getting more swollen, along with her nose, her nasal membranes in the corners of her mouth. Upon closer investigation, she realized that the lesions that were once in the back of her oral mucosa a year ago when she visited Brazil were all of a sudden now back, but with force. The lesions, as before, appeared bright red, except this time they looked necrose in the middle. Large, donut-shaped lesions with pockets of necrose tissue covered the back of her oral mucosa in her mouth, along with severe throat pain. A week continued like this until it got to the point where she started realizing that whatever was causing the lesions was actually eating away the tissue in the back of her throat. It was at this point that she finally got in her car and rushed herself to the ER, exactly 1 year and 3 weeks since her trip to Brazil. The back of her throat had swollen so much it was hard for her to swallow, and when she looked in the mirror, the oral mucosa seemed totally necrose. She was confused, lightheaded, and she had an extreme fever. Her lymph nodes were swollen, and she told herself that she had to see a doctor. And this is where our story is taken over by the head of infectious disease at UC Health in Colorado. When she got to the ER, she was rapidly losing consciousness. She had a very high fever of 104.1. Nurses immediately wheeled her back to a room in the ER where they tried to stabilize her, hooking her up to a respirator due to her inability to breathe because of the swelling in her neck. A physician came in once she was stabilized and examined her. Upon being seen by our infectious disease specialist, Bernice's friends were questioned to find out if they had done any foreign travel within the past couple of years. Why, yes, they answered. They had recently been to Brazil about a year ago. With this information, our infectious disease specialist ordered a blood test specifically looking for elevated peripheral blood mononuclear cells and macrophages. Additionally, the blood test was also to show if there were any elevated levels of cytokine production. Along with the blood test, our infectious disease specialist also ordered a swab of the mucosal tissue around the throat to rule out any diseases like necrotizing fasciitis. As everyone was waiting for the results of the blood test to come back, Bernice's condition was quickly deteriorating. The swelling in her neck kept getting worse, so as a result, physicians gave Bernice a cocktail of anti-inflammatory drugs in a hope to try and curb the swelling. Additionally, the back of her throat, or the mucosa membrane lining her throat, was rapidly deteriorating as a result of the lesions in the back of her throat, along with the mucosal membrane around her nose. When the blood tests came back, they revealed very high levels of human peripheral blood mononuclear cells and macrophages. Additionally, it also revealed high levels of a specific type of cytokine called CXCL10 and IL-10. The reason these are significant is because CXCL10 and IL-10, along with peripheral blood mononuclear cells, or PBMCs, are special cells and cytokines that only come online during an infection with leishmaniasis, and with a particular strain of leishmania at that. The strain of leishmania that was affecting Bernice was called Leishmania brasiliensis. Leishmaniasis brasiliensis is actually one of the hardest leishmania parasites to treat, and it is also the parasite that most commonly causes what Bernice had, which is mucocutaneous leishmaniasis. Mucocutaneous leishmaniasis is the result of a bite of a sandfly. The sandfly bites a patient, which happened with Bernice when she was at the cattle farm in Campo Grande, Brazil. The sandfly bites the patient, and in secreting an anticoagulant into the wound so the blood doesn't clot, the sandfly secretes leishmaniasis. In Brazil, leishmania parasites are called New World leishmania parasites, and oftentimes they are extremely severe. However, leishmania, particularly Leishmania brasiliensis, is very hard to diagnose, considering the fact that a lot of times patients do not show any symptoms other than the initial symptoms, which are a lesion that disappears quite rapidly, a bloody nose, sore throat, and congestion, for sometimes up to a year before the secondary wave of symptoms comes about. Leishmaniasis is actually one of the rare tropical diseases, and additionally, leishmaniasis is very hard to treat. The reason for this is because leishmania parasites are deviated into two broad groups. Old World leishmania, which commonly occurs in Africa and the Asian peninsula, and New World leishmania, which commonly occurs in South America and Central America. This makes it very hard to treat because treatments that work for Old World leishmania parasites do not work for New World leishmania parasites. And at the moment, there are no effective treatments for Leishmania brasiliensis, which is what in this clinical study Bernice had. There are experimental treatments, though, which did work out for Bernice in the end. However, these experimental treatments can have a failure rate of up to 45%. And the most promising experimental treatment is actually using pentavalent antimony, which is basically a variation of the element antimony in a drug form. In certain experimental studies, antimony was more effective than another drug in question, fluconazole, which only had a 26% success rate versus a 30 to 53.8% success rate. Therefore, at the moment, it is of utmost importance to develop a new type of treatment for leishmania, and particularly leishmaniasis leishmania brasiliensis, because there is no active treatment, and it is a major health problem of Brazil. And this parasite can be disfiguring. It can, as previously mentioned in this video, it can cause severe necrosis of the mucocutaneous tissue in the back of the throat and in the nose, and it is a permanently life-altering disease. And in very rare instances, depending on what parasite or what strain of leishmania you're afflicted with, the disease itself can actually also affect the internal organs, and in that instance it's called visceral leishmaniasis. And it is, as previously mentioned, a major health issue in Brazil because of its increase in prevalence around areas with livestock and because of its disfiguring tendencies. So, with future directions going forward, personally, I think it should be on the top of anyone's list in the healthcare field to work with various global health agencies like the WHO and pharmaceutical companies like Shire Pharmaceuticals to come up with new treatments for leishmaniasis.